Presenter's laptop, sound check. Presenter's laptop, sound check. Clerk's laptop, sound check. Clerk's laptop, sound check. HPRI Board of Directors meeting. Sound check 2. Sound check 2. Clerk's laptop. Sound check clerk's laptop. Sound check 2. Presenter's laptop. Sound check 2. Presenter's laptop. Again in pre. So we are live, and it's presenter's laptop, clerk's laptop, and 30. So if the chair wishes to commence.
Who's the chair of this thing? Okay, I didn't get a script, but
I will
yes.
send that right now.
Or you probably did send it. I just didn't see it. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. It's been that kind of morning, counselor. Let me just get it for you.
More toggling. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to call this meeting to order of the Hamilton Renewable Power Incorporated Board of Directors. It is June the 22nd, 2021. And we have myself and Councillor Johnson in attendance for quorum. Madam Secretary, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Chair Danko. We have one addition to the agenda. Item 6.4, Hamilton Renewable Power Incorporated Board of Directors confirmatory actions. And these are contained within item 6.1, which is the resolutions document. Those are all the changes for today.
Thank you. So moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by myself. All in favor? Do we need to vote in e-scribe or can we just?
You can vote verbally and we'll put it into eScribe for you.
Okay, so we're both in favor. Thank you. Where did it go? There we are. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none. Just give me a second here. I gotta reorganize my screen so I can see both. That's better. Okay. So we have the minutes from the September 17th, 2020 by Councillor Johnson, second by myself. All in favor? Thumbs up. Thank you. Staff presentations. We have David Oak will be providing the staff presentation. David?
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tom. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Today you have an information report in front of you along with the presentation. Tom Chessman's going to run us through the operational updates, and David Oakes is our accountant, and he will be running through the financial updates. Now, unfortunately, he's not on the line, so Tom Chessman will do his best to go through those slides on the financials, and hopefully David Oak could join us. So over to you, Tom.
Okay, can everybody see the first slide and hear me okay?
Yep, we can see it, Tom.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay. Okay. And let me know if David Oak pops in because I won't be able to see all the windows popping up. So.
Yeah, David just joined us. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good timing, David. Whew.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, no problem. Can you hear me?
Yeah. We just got started on the slide deck, David. I'll pass it over to you once I'm done the short few slides that I've got.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. So yeah, just a quick operational update and looking back at we'll be comparing the Q1 for each of the last few years. Then there's a lot more to speak about on the financial update. And the last couple of, the last slide, we've got a few proposals and updates on those actions that have been mentioned in the past. So just as a reminder, the organization works with this structure and staff are running this this business as corporate officers. And of course, there's the board of directors and the non-voting members, Dan McKinnon, of course, on the board. And then the rest of the staff are working away at taking care of business. Looking back at the Q1 for the past number of years, you can see how production has been a little bit inconsistent, but has been chugging along. The one thing to take note of in 2018, you can see how there's no production for Woodward. That's when the sphere was being painted and operations were affected by the that project and that work, and that's a bit of a theme that we're going to speak to a little bit as we go through the presentation today about operational challenges affected by Woodward operations, which are certainly lots of work going on down there, and you've, I'm sure, heard updates of different projects occurring. And in the past, we've talked about the sphere, or the biogas supply not really expected to affect operations, but we have had a number of different projects indeed affecting operations. So it has proven to be a little bit more volatile than we had hoped for Woodward. And we'll speak a little bit about Glanbrook in a second as well. So in terms of the energy production, we started off pretty good this year in January, February, and into March. At the end of February and into March, we did have some unplanned maintenance going on, and we're getting back online as we go forward. However, we do expect going forward beyond this quarter to see some additional interruptions, again due to the Woodward electrical upgrade that's preventing us from producing energy and putting it in the grid due to the major electrical upgrade that's going on there. So just a quick snapshot there, and for more detailed and financial analysis, turn this over to David. And David, you can just tell me to advance the slides, and I'll
Okay, sure, no problem, Tom. Thanks. Okay, to begin, this financial date will consist of 12 slides. As shown, it will address the 2020 fiscal performance, present a high-level summary of the 2021 operating budget, provide a profitability projection to the end of this year based on year-to-date operating results, and last, show the trend in Hamilton Renewable Power earnings and city net benefits going back to 2006. Next slide, Tom. All of the 2020 financial information you will see in these slides were audited by KPMG. A net loss of $66,000 is being reported for 2020, which is attributable to a shortfall in electricity generation revenues for both Woodward and Glanbrook. This is an accounting loss, which is net of depreciation and taxes, and has two negative consequences. The first, there are no 2020 net earnings, so in accordance with the council-approved dividend policy, the city will not be eligible for a Hamilton Renewable Power dividend payment this year. The second negative is that Hamilton Renewable Power retained earnings account that is similar to city reserve will need to fund this deficit instead of receiving an earnings contribution for this year. Next slide, Tom. Highlighted in this slide are some additional noteworthy facts on last year's financial performance. Payments issued to the city in 2020 for methane legal and staff support added up to roughly $1 million. In addition, these payments, a $142,000 dividend payout was issued to the city in 2020. So in total, payments in excess of $1.2 million were paid to the city last year. At the end of 2020, the year-end cash balance totaled just over $886,000, representing a 12% or $96,000 increase from the previous year. You may ask, how could we experience a positive cash flow when there was a reported 2020 net loss? The primary reason is that the reported accounting loss is net of depreciation, which is a non-cash expense. As stated in the last bullet point, Hamilton Renewable Power has a PIL tax credit balance of $83,000 with the province, which shows up on the balance sheet as a receivable. PIL tax advances are paid monthly based on the previous year final taxes owed. The final PIL tax bill for 2020 came in significantly lower than 2019, resulting in a large credit balance, which will be rolled over and applied against the 2021 PIL taxes owed instead of being refunded. Next slide. Depicted in this slide is the actual revenues earned in 2020. Hamilton Renewable Power has only 3 revenue sources, with electricity generation proceeds from Hydro 1 and the independent electricity system operator making up 90% of the total. Thermal energy in the form of hot water is produced by Woodward Cogen and is sold back to the city to be used in various processes and for space heating at the wastewater treatment plant. The 2020 revenue total of $2.9 million here is down $300,000 from the $3.2 million that was earned in 2019, which is a decline of 9.4%. Next slide, Tom. This slide provides a breakdown of the 2020 actual expenses and includes both operating and capital expenditures. Operating expenses totaled $2,197,000 in 2020, which is an increase of $59,000 or 2.7% from the year before. Since 2017, operating expenses have increased 6.4% or $132,000, which can be attributable to inflationary pressures. Repair and maintenance of the generating equipment, which would include periodic engine overhauls and other preventive maintenance and servicing, is the main cost driver, totaling just over $1.2 million and representing 55% of all operating expenses in 2020. This repairs and maintenance percentage remains unchanged from 2019 and has stayed consistent in the 50 to 55% range of total operating expenses the last 5 years. As noted in the bar graph, capital cost of $64,000 was incurred in 2020. This capital outlay was needed to replace the chiller equipment at Glanbrook, which will be depreciated over time based on the lifespan of the asset. The other expenses in this graph of any significance are pretty well self-explanatory. Next slide, Tom. Pictured in this slide is a summary of the 2020 actual revenues and expenses compared to budget. As shown on the green shaded line, a net profit of approximately $195,000 was budgeted in 2020 using the 2019 reported outcomes as a guideline. However, as you can see, a net loss of $66,000 was the actual result, falling well under the budget target by $261,000. The main reason for this 2020 loss is a $339,000 budget shortfall in revenues. Glanbrook electricity generation revenues were $271,000 under budget as production declined 15% from the year before, translating into 2.6 million less kilowatt hours of output. A reduction in the methane gas supply and an increase in downtime hours are the 2 factors that had a detrimental impact on Glanbrook production in 2020. A 21% increase in downtime hours for Woodward in 2020 compared to 2019 was also a contributing factor in the lower actual revenues, as electricity generation and thermal energy earnings at this location were $61,000 below budget. On the expense side of the ledger, operating and maintenance costs, hydro charges, and city support fees were the main sources for the roughly $33,000 unfavorable variance. Next slide, Tom. The point of this slide is to emphasize that despite the reported accounting loss in 2020, the operations of Hamilton Renewable Power were still profitable, although not at a level experienced in the recent past. It is therefore important to put the 2020 accounting loss in context in terms of the overall financial performance. What you see here is a graph that compares the net income against the EBITDA and cash flow financial measures, which are two indicators that are used to assess the profitability of a company. The acronym EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. It can give the reader an idea how well a company is handling its operating costs by stripping out debt financing, taxes, depreciation, and amortization in the profitability calculations. The $477,000 EBITDA amount for 2020 is the net return after deducting operating expenses from operating revenues. As you can see, there's a healthy margin between the two numbers. Cash flow is another measure used to determine the company's financial health from a liquidity standpoint. It is calculated by taking the net income, adding back non-cash expenses, and changes in working capital. The $96,000 positive cash flow amount for 2020 is the excess funds earned and set aside by Hamilton Renewable Power after covering any financial obligations for the year. The audited financial statements include a cash flow statement, which reinforces the importance of the cash flow measure. Net cash flow just from operating activities alone in 2020 before tax, dividend, and capital-related disbursements totaled $442,000. Next slide, Tom. The financial position of Hamilton Renewable Power at the end of 2020 is illustrated by this slide. From an accounting perspective, the 2020 net worth of the company is $5.5 million, as shown under the equity line. This net worth figure is $208,000 less than 2019, with the main reason being the reduction in the unappreciated value of the fixed assets that will decline each year with the posting of depreciation expense. The equity amount is composed of 600,000 common shares valued at $10 each that are held by the city, less the reported deficit in the retained earnings account. Next slide, Tom. Outlined in this slide is a high-level summary of the 2021 operating budget compared to 2020. For 2021, a net loss of approximately $30,000 was budgeted, which, as you can see, is a huge shift from the budgeted $195,000 net profit in 2020. The $454,000 reduction in budgeted revenues for 2021, shown under the change column, is the number that really stands out here and is the explanation for the budgeted loss this year. The three factors contributed to the decrease in budgeted revenues for 2021. First, there was an increase in downtime in 2020, which was taken into account when budgeting the 2021 engine run hours used to calculate the expected revenues for the year. Second, the actual Glanbrook kilowatt hour production in 2020 showed a major decline the last half of the year due to less methane, and which impacted the 2021 budgeted production rates. The last and probably the most significant factor was the planned 2.5-month shutdown of the Woodward Cogen due to a power outage related to construction work at the water wastewater treatment plant. This shutdown reduced budgeted gross revenues by $138,000, as the Woodward gross revenues monthly are about $56,000. So you take that number, multiply 2.5 months, that gives you the $138,000 gross revenue loss for 2021. The change in budgeted operating expenses for 2021 was not as dramatic, with an $85,000 drop from 2020. Repair and maintenance, consulting, and depreciation expense budgets were reduced in 2021, offset by a budgeted increase in city staff support. The 2021 budget includes depreciation expenses, which are a non-cash expense. Backing out the depreciation expense would result in a positive net cash flow of $516,000 from operating activities this year. If the 2021 actual results end up in a net loss position as budgeted, no dividend payout would be issued to the city in 2022. On the plus side, the 2021 budget would still provide the city with a net benefit of over $1 million, which represents the sum of payments issued by Hamilton Renewable Power for methane legal and staff support. Next slide, Tom. This slide highlights the 2021 year-to-date operating results for the reporting period ending April 30th. For this 4-month period, an after-tax net loss of $68,295 is being reported, as highlighted by the green shaded line. For the same January to April period in 2020, a $67,565 net loss was realized. So the year-to-date financial numbers are similar for both years, with a difference of only $730. The overall April year-to-date net loss this year is mainly attributable to the Glanbrook electricity generation revenues, which are $72,000 under budget due to lower than expected kilowatt-hour production rates. These production rates are dependent on the level of methane in the gas supply. Glanbrook net proceeds are $120,000 less than what was earned in the same reporting period in 2020. The good news is that Woodward April year-to-date revenues from electricity generation and thermal energy sales are in a $26,000 favorable variance position. These Woodward year-to-date revenues are up $62,000 in 2021 from 2020 levels due to a 577-hour decrease in downtime. The $5,000 unfavorable variance in the expense line is on account of higher than expected operating and maintenance costs associated with the Woodward Cogen, as actual engine run hours exceeded the April year-to-date budget by 269 hours. As you can see in this statement, year-to-date actual operating expenses in 2021 totaled $699,000, which is almost identical to the $700,000 spent for the same period in 2020. On a brighter note, the April year-to-date numbers here has resulted in a positive cash flow of $118,000. Next slide, Tom. Using the April year-to-date actual data as a starting point, I think you missed. Go back one slide. Yeah, that one. Using the April year-to-date data as a starting point, a net loss of $87,000 is being projected by year end, which would result in a $56,000 unfavorable budget variance. This year-end forecast had assumed that the Woodward Cogen would be shut down for 2.5 months in 2021. However, more recent information has come to light that indicates this shutdown will start in July and will not end until the first week of October, which would be a 3.5 month shutdown. With this new information, the year-end loss not shown here is now forecasted to be $105,000. The net loss of this Woodward shutdown on its own, when taking into account lost revenues and reduced variable expenses, is estimated to be $115,000. Budget mitigation options are limited, as there are very few discretionary expenditures that can be reduced, with the exception of the city staff support payments, which would have a negative operating budget implications for the city. Expenses are not the problem. Lost revenues due to the Woodward shutdown and lower production rates at Glanbrook is what is driving this projected loss. The numbers speak for themselves here. 2021 is not going to be a good financial year for Hamilton Renewable Power from an accounting point of view, although the net cash flow is still forecasted to be at $415,000. Revenues are a wild card, as they can be very unpredictable from year to year. Expenses are stable and fairly consistent from year to year. There's high level of confidence that the 2021 will end up in a net loss position at year end. And as I previously mentioned, This net loss forecast, if it comes to pass, would result in no city dividend in 2022. Next slide, Tom. This last finance slide summarizes the Hamilton Renewable Power earnings history and savings to city taxpayers since commercial operations began in 2006. Looking at the net income column, you can see that the reported loss in 2020 is a deviation from our profitability trend going back 12 years, with 2008 being the last year where a net loss was realized. The city dividend in the middle column represents 80% of the net earnings in the previous fiscal year. For example, the $142,000 dividend paid to the city in 2020 was calculated using the 2019 net income figure. The city net benefit numbers in the last column represent the sum of payments issued to the city by Hamilton Renewable Power. The city payments were for methane consumed by the engines, legal, accounting, and administrative support. It will also include the city dividend payout shown in the middle column. These payments have resulted in annual savings to the city in excess of $1 million, with a cumulative net benefit of roughly $19.8 million. And that's about the end of the financial slides. So I'll pass it over to Tom, who will provide an update on the status of some development proposals.
Thanks, David. And just really quickly, wanted to give the board an update on the solar project. We had considered moving forward with two particular solar projects that have been we've been eyeing on two arenas. And last board meeting we talked about that. Since that meeting, there's been some funding available through the federal funding program called the GICB, Green Initiative in Commercial Buildings. That particular funding program offers up to 80% funding for projects that include solar. And because of the significant contribution that's available, we are recommending that the city applies for this project and proceeds with getting approval to go ahead with those projects. So at the end of the day, the city would benefit by having these projects in place and funded through this program, like I said, up to 80%. So we wanted to just provide an update to the board on the solar project in that regard. The other Woodward biogas study speaks to the fact that our supply contract with the IESO is a 20-year contract that's ending in the end of 2025. It's coming up fairly quickly. And so the intent is to confirm what direction we would like to go. And so the obvious options are, do we look for another power purchase agreement? And the preliminary, well, we're gonna get an answer for these as part of this study. But so do we continue to produce power under a long-term contract, if that contract's even available? Or do we use that limited biogas at Woodward to produce renewable natural gas? So we're doing a little bit of that on the site right now. And there's more gas than we can possibly use in that one system that we have now. So we want to consider, if you will, doubling down on the renewable natural gas and producing more of it for the city's benefit in some way, shape, or form. So the idea is to consider those two options and look at perhaps a third option. There's a lot of talk about hydrogen, and there's maybe something else out there. And this study is going to set us on the path as to what we want to do, so we can get going and have whatever that solution may be built and ready to go as we step out of the existing agreement into a new agreement. But first things first, let's understand what the best use of the biogas is at Woodward. And that is the end of the presentation.
Thank you.
Would you like me to stop sharing the presentation?
Yes, please. Thank you, David and Tom.
Okay.
Councilor Johnson, do you have any questions? No. Just one question for me, just so I'm clear. Even though we're showing I think you described it as an accounting loss, that we are still making payments to the city of over $1 million a year for the methane and for legal and such, so that the net benefit to the city is still fairly substantial.
Yeah,
That's correct. David,
basically,
go ahead.
Hamilton Renewable Power can still meet all its financial obligations because it has sufficient cash flow coming in. And it's still very profitable when you just look at the cash flow from operating activities alone. So there's no concerns with the viability of Hamilton Renewable Power, even though we were experiencing an accounting loss.
And then just to follow up on that, like, so projecting forward, are we anticipating the same trend, or is this kind of a short-term structural issue that'll be rectified once Woodward comes back online and everything gets back to normal?
Yeah, so a couple things I'd like to say on that, if I could, David. The speaking specifically to the gas availability at the landfill, it's always been a bit of a wild card. It's an art and a science to extract the gas out of the landfill, and but what we saw and what we normally see in the summer is a little bit lower availability of methane and of the volume of gas coming out of that particular site. We would normally see before the summer of last year, before the summer of 2020, we would see the methane content be over 50%. The end of last summer, it was down in the mid to low 40s. And so we expected that, as happens in many years, the methane content to rise in the fall and winter months. It has not happened. It remains to be a concern, as we shouldn't be surprised, and we certainly want to factor that into our next year's budget for 2022. That let's not count on that. Let's count on a lower methane content and adjust the numbers accordingly for the future budget. Absolutely, and that's definitely what David and I will work on in Rome to get this budget set a little bit more closely attuned to what's been going on in the last 12 months. But that's a major factor, and so we've got to keep an eye on that. And the same thing is happening at the Glanbrook landfill in terms of a contracting basis. That contract's up in 2027, so we're going to want to start focusing on what's the best plan and long-term plan for that. So I just want to mention that. And then just to Woodward, again, that electrical upgrade, we were told there wasn't going to be disruptions, and now we're told it might be 2 months, it might be less, it might be 3 months and change. So it's very difficult for us to plan for those sorts of things. I love working with the staff down there, but it's difficult for them to predict these major electrical impacts to the basically the distribution system that's getting this major overhaul. So that is very hard to predict, and I would hope that going forward after this project's done this year, we would see less and less of that type of interruption going forward as well. But we'll factor some of that into 2022's budget as we get going on that.
Okay, thank you. That part about the percentage methane in the gas from Glanbrook's kind of fascinating. I never really thought of it that way, but it makes sense that it's variable in that depends on what's off-gassing in the year. That's really interesting.
And ultimately, it'll go down to close to zero, right? It'll go away eventually. It's just a matter: is it 5 years, 10 years? That's
Right.
that's the art of the whole business.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no further questions, then I just need a vote to receive the presentation. Again, moved by Councillor Johnson, second by myself. All in favor. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. We have the second here. So there's 4 motions. So 6.1 through to 6.4. So we're going to approve those, and then staff can speak to 6.2 and 6.3. So we're going to approve them first and then speak to them after. That's what's in my my schedule here.
Councillor, you just have to move and second them to get them on the floor.
Okay. So moved by Councillor Johnson, second by myself. So on 6.2 and 6.3, either Tom or David, is there anything you need to add to those?
Is that directed to a particular person?
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Counselor.
So it says staff will now speak to the 6.2 and 6.3, which is
Oh,
the,
sorry, that was part of the
audited statement in
presentation.
the budget. Okay, perfect.
Sorry.
Then all we need to do is approve them then. So show of
Yeah.
hands. Councillor Johnson is in favor. I'm in favor. So those are approved. And I think that's it.
We have a motion to adjourn, please, Counselor. Mr. Chair.
Moved by poor Councillor Johnson. Thank you for suffering through this meeting, Councillor. I remember what it felt like.
Sorry, guys.
And
I'm going to bed now. Good night.
Yeah,
Good night.
that's approved, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, councilors.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.